Hello, Dr. Missaoui. Thanks for joining the MRFimpacts team today. We want to talk to you about and learn more about your research on a multi-state project. My understanding is it's impacting forage varieties. And first off, for those who don't know, what is forage?
But forage are typically talking about crops that are grown specifically to be grazed by livestock or conserved as hay or silage, or in the case of the Southeast, as baleage. So it specifically means or refers to edible parts of the plant other than grains that can provide feed for the grazing animal or that can be harvested for feeding. And grasses and legumes usually make the bulk of forage crops, even though there are other species.
And why is it so important that we do have different varieties of forage?
Well, for forages, it's unique system because when you think about a forage system, there is no way you can meet animal needs just based on one crop. And as an example, here in the Southeast, we grow a lot of Bermuda grass, and it grows just for 3 months. So what are you going to do for the rest of the year? Um, so in order to meet the seasonal distribution of forage availability, we have to rely on multiple species and, of course, different varieties with different maturities. You also have the environmental conditions, which also dictate the choice of the adapted variety to your conditions. Um, one of the things here in the Southeast, they will tell you alfalfa does not grow well. And that's because historically, they've been trying varieties that were developed in California or in the Intermountain region. And those conditions are different from the Southeast. So those varieties have failed. And now we have to start from scratch trying to convince growers that we have developed varieties specific to the region and they work very well. You also have the production system. So if you have a system that is based on grazing, you have to choose varieties that have good grazing tolerance and good persistence under grazing. So different varieties is a necessity.
Dr. Missaoui, tell us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in this field of work.
Sure. Actually, to me, I'm not new to forage. I've been around forages all my life. Actually, I grew up selecting alfalfa with my father since I was 5 years old.
Cool.
At the time, I hated it because, instead of playing soccer and, as I'm digging alfalfa plants and growing them next, to beehives for crossing. Um, then I thought I would never get back, to working with alfalfa. So I went on, through high school, but eventually I was offered a scholarship to study at Oregon State University. That's where I did my undergrad. And I ended up working again in range science on forages. Then I did my MS at Texas Tech University, and I worked on forages. Then I did some work for Tunisia, and I was working on forage seed technology. Then I came back to UG and I did my PhD, and I worked on biomass breeding and genetics. Then I went on and I thought I'm done with forages. So I worked for Monsanto for 7 years, working on soybean, which is practically another forage. Then I ended coming back to UG, leading the forage breeding and genetics. So it seems like it's my destiny to be around forages.
Just can't get away from it.
I guess it's my destiny. Yeah. And to be specific to the NE-1710, Of course, forage breeding in the US is a very small group. So it's a very small community with very limited resources and, very broad missions. So the multi-state, actually, we figured this would be an ideal platform, to collaborate, to bring, knowledge together, and especially on shared topics, and generate more data and knowledge that individual programs cannot do alone.
For those of us that don't really know what forage research looks like, does most of your work take place in a lab, or are you out in a field?
So in my program, we have a field research and cultivar development component, and we also have a molecular lab where we are, very well equipped, and we focus on the genetic mapping of useful traits and the development of molecular markers and genomic resources, that we can use to support the field breeding program and increase the accuracy of our selection. And usually, like on a day-to-day basis, what we would be doing, we either running greenhouse crosses in bee cages, or, threshing seed, or cleaning it, DNA extraction, genotyping, tissue sampling. So it's pretty much, it's a big program, at least to say about it.
What are some of the challenges of doing this type of work?
The major challenge working with forages is the necessity to work on multiple species. So you cannot avoid that. And of course, because simply you cannot build a forage system around one species. The other part, working with cool season forage species, they are not adapted to the Southeast. And of course, the environment is very different from northern locations. So when you think of northern locations, they have one season, start in April and they end in September, October. But for us in the Southeast, winters are mild. So we're practically in the field all year round. And sometimes, like this time of the year, even though Corona is messing up our schedules, we usually harvesting and planting at the same time. So we have two seasons, fall and spring planting. And, you add to that, all these perennial cool season species, they are outcrossing. So unlike, wheat or soybean, or they are self, and you don't have to worry about cross contamination. So to cross legumes, we have to keep them in bee cages. So we have to take care of the bumblebees, and we have to take space for the cages. And for grasses, you need a lot of land to keep that isolation between the different entries that you're working with. And of course, for the lab, the genetics is very complicated. All these species are polyploids. So that makes it very difficult. And another signature of our program is all the perennials we select for persistence under grazing. Actually, that's the one thing, the UG or breeding program is known for, is development of grazing resistant or tolerant varieties. So we have to deal with animals, and we have to do the right timing to get the animals there, and so on. So there's multiple levels of complexities that we have to deal with.
Within this project, what do you feel was your biggest accomplishment?
So what I see as my biggest accomplishment is almost like, taming animals for a zoo. So, getting these species, non-native species who are adapted to temperate environments to work in the Southeast, to tolerate heat, tolerate low pH, and so on. And of course, with the tough environment we have, I mean, it's a big challenge. So we have released several cultivars, and actually, you know, what I call a hit is developing the first ever perennial ryegrass adapted to the southeast. So it's something we are releasing, and we have a company who is interested now in licensing.
How do you feel this research really impacts the average person?
When you think about it on, you know, individual person, forage is again very unique situation because yes, when you produce soybean or corn, you know you're getting the grain and that's the value.
Mhm.
So forage is more than 90% of the production is fed the livestock. So you cannot see the value directly, but of course it impacts the individual person economically speaking, you know, in terms of the availability, the good quality of meat and milk. But of course, in addition to the economic value, you know, especially for perennial forages, they develop or they deliver significant environmental impacts, which contributes to the quality of living. So when we improve forages for pastures, you know, we're helping, you know, increase land efficiency so that you have an increased, you know, land available for areas that are unsuitable to production. So that's where we, you know, reserve most pastures. What is good for cropping, you know, remains for cropping, you know, unsuitable areas we can, you know, improve forage species or varieties that can do well in those areas and increase their value. Also, when you think about the impact of growing legumes, you know, whether for forage and actually a lot of farms grow them as cover crops because you want to fix nitrogen and minimize, you know, that input, you know, to crops so that kind of, you know, generate benefits and impacts, you know, growers of other crops. So there was multi dimensions really to the impact of forage crops. I think what's important about project is just, and this is a forage. Forage is a key element to the economy, not only the country but globally. We keep talking about feeding the world, and then you cannot do that without taking care or without investing in forage production, because that way you can free corn and other crops for human feed and for other things. So forage crops are a key component of a global economy that cannot be neglected.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been great getting to know you as well as your work with the Multistate Project NE-1710. And as always, we look forward to sharing the impacts.